Hi guys! Today we're going to talk about all the books that I read in July. I read kind of a ridiculous amount this month, so just gonna jump right into it. So this video is not like an hour long. And starting with the book actually that I read mostly in June but didn't finish quite in time to record for my June wrap up. Rocket, do you mind? And that is Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. This book was so intimidating. It sat on my TBR shelf for a really long time, but finally I read it last month and I'm so glad I finally was able to get to it. It was so good. I actually have a reading vlog of, me reading this book. If you'd care to check that out, I'll leave it linked up above and in the description box below. But overall, really loved this book. I gave it 5 stars. It really delves into sort of Eastern and Western views of dragon mythology and wove it into this really epic high fantasy story. It's multi-POV and I genuinely loved all the characters it followed, which I feel like is really rare for a multi-POV story. There's usually one character that is kind of boring or I just don't care for that much, but all the characters in this were so intriguing, and I just thought the way that their stories all sort of interconnected at the end was really cool and really well done, and I'm so curious to read more by Samantha Shannon. I know she's got another series out that I want to check out at some point because this one was so good and I can't wait to read anything everything else that she's done. But yeah, if you'd like to know more about my opinions and thoughts on this book, check out the vlog that I did. Next up was a highly anticipated release for me for July, and that was Survive the Night by Riley Sager. I'd only ever read one other Riley Sager book before picking this one up, and that was Home Before Dark, and this book was so different from that in a really good way. Home Before Dark is more of a haunted house kind of thriller, and this is more of a serial killer thriller, and it takes place, as the title suggests, in one night. So it was so intense, and literally I couldn't stop reading it because I needed to know what happened. It was really fast-paced, the tension was really killer, and the characters where she doubts what she's experiencing really kind of disorients the reader in a good way. So every sort of twist that happened really packed a punch, and I really enjoyed this. I think that's kind of maybe a controversial opinion. I have seen other people kind of roast this one or say that it's their least favorite Riley Sager book, but I really enjoyed it. I thought it reflected the 90s pretty well. I think if you like more of a true crimey sort of thriller, this is good for that, because again, it deals with a campus serial killer. But yeah, overall this was really fun, and it kind of gave me the exact experience that I'm looking for in a thriller. So I've recommended this to quite a few people and they've liked it, so I feel good about my rating for this. I gave this 4 stars. Next up, I read a novella called Burning Roses by S.L. Huang, and this is sort of a retelling, or it's sort of a queer retelling of Red Riding Hood and a Chinese folklore figure named Hu Yi, and it sort of follows them in their sort of midlife years, looking back on everything that brought them to the point that they're at. They're both sort of alone together. They've pushed their loved ones away in different ways, and they're reflecting on their life, and I don't know, this one was really interesting, and it was very short, but it was very captivating. I read it in one sitting. This book definitely has a quest element to it, which was really interesting, again, especially where it was so short, but it was also very reflective and dealt a lot with sort of family and sacrifice and prejudice and searching for immortality. So this little book packs a lot into it, and I really enjoyed it, and I thought the writing was quite beautiful as well. So I gave this one 4 stars. Next up is another little book called Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. This is sort of a collection of short stories, but they're all interwoven. I think it's 4 or 5 chapters focus on a cafe in Japan that has a particular seat that can bring you in somewhere else in time, but there's so many stipulations that go along with that. One of them is you can't leave that seat when you go back in time, and you can't change the present. So you can get closure from, going back in time, but you can't do anything to change the current situation that brought you to that chair in the first place. This was such a beautiful little book. I will say the writing style kind of threw me off at first, and I don't know if that's just because I haven't read a lot of Japanese fiction. It might be something a little bit more common with that, but this was, I think, my first book that I've read that's been translated from Japanese. That might not be right. Yeah, it was very different, but I got into it as I was reading it, and it was really good, and it gets so emotional as it goes on. And again, the stories really tie together in a beautiful way. There's characters that are present in one story that become important later on, and it was just so beautiful, and I loved this little cafe by the end of it and all the people who worked there and visited there. And I believe there's a sequel, so I will definitely pick that up at some point because I really enjoyed this, and I gave it 4 stars. And following Survive the Night, I was kind of in a thriller mood this month, so I picked up Lock Every Door, also by Riley Sager, because I'm pretty sure I actually have all of his books now. And so after Survive the Night, I was like, I gotta see what other people are saying when they're saying that Survive the Night is their least favorite Sager book. So I picked this one up, and actually I hold strong to my opinion that Survive the Night was better, actually. Lock Every Door is interesting. And quite creepy, especially towards the end, but it took a really long time for me to fall in love with the protagonist. But once the situation started to become clearer, I was more invested. But if you don't know, the story takes place in this sort of infamous building in New York City. It's very secretive. Like, the residents that live there don't talk about it. People who have visited don't talk about it. But it's like right by Central Park, so it's really like, it's very famous. The main character, Jules, gets the opportunity to become an apartment sitter, and she gets paid like $1,000 a week just to hang out in this apartment and just to make sure it's occupied and well taken care of. But she's not allowed to talk to any of the residents. She's not allowed to spend the night anywhere else. She's not allowed to have anyone over. There's like a lot of rules that make this situation like very sketchy, but she's desperate for money. She just got out of a relationship and she has like no family ties to kind of fall back on. So she's quite desperate at the point that she ends up taking this job. And at first she feels really lucky to be there, but as time goes on, she starts getting sort of an uneasy feeling. She befriends another apartment sitter who seems to be kind of scared of the building, and just weird things start happening that really unsettle Jules. And again, this wasn't my favorite Riley Sager book, but I did think it was a lot of fun, especially towards the end. The last like third of it, I couldn't stop reading it. I had to know what was happening. It was a pretty good thriller in that sense. I think it would make a fun movie, maybe, especially where like you have kind of this spooky, famous building. I think that would be a fun, like, atmospheric element. But yeah, so I gave this one 3 stars. Not my favorite Sager book, but definitely very enjoyable. I was starting to feel a little romancy after that. I needed sort of a change of pace with the reading. So I picked up, finally, The Hating Game by Sally Thorne. This is like the end-all be-all of romantic comedy books on BookTube. This is like the one. It is like highest tiered on a lot of romance lists. Going into it, I was a little intimidated by the hype. I did not think it could live up to it. But I'm happy to say that I thought this was a really fun, cute book. It focuses on 2 coworkers, Lucy and Joshua, and they both kind of have the same job. They work for sort of co-managers or co-CEOs of a publishing company. They're both assistants to the CEO, but they both do like a ton of work, and they work in the same office together, and they have like a very competitive relationship, especially at first. They play a lot of these like games, like the staring game, and it's a little passive aggressive, and it's sort of a joke in the company, like with everyone else, that like how much they hate each other. It's amazing that they can actually get anything done. So this is an enemies to lovers romance, and just the development of their relationship was so fun. I think enemies to lovers is difficult to pull off in a believable way, because either the love interest just comes off as way too much of a jerk, or like the premise for why they're enemies is really weak. But I could see why they didn't quite get along at first, and I thought the development of their relationship was believable. And yeah, overall, I thought this was really cute. My only complaint about it is I feel like it ends super abruptly. There's sort of this element in which they're vying for the same job, and you don't find out who gets the job. I don't care if that's a spoiler, because I wish I had known that going into it. So that was weird to me. like, it felt like it was missing an epilogue. And I know a lot of romance books have epilogues that kind of jump forward in time a little bit and you see how certain things sort of wrap up. And yeah, that was strange to me that we didn't get a resolution on that. And there was also like all this buildup to going to Lucy's family strawberry farm, and like that just sort of gets left unresolved. And I don't know, it was strange to me. I have heard that there is an epilogue in Sally Thorne's other book, 99% Mine, but like, I don't want to have to pick up a whole other book just to read what happens with this one. I believe this is coming out as a movie soon. This is soon to be a major motion picture here with Lucy Hale starring in it, so I'm excited to see that, and hopefully they have a good ending, because that was the only thing I didn't love about this one, was it just felt like it didn't have an ending. So yeah, excited to see how this one gets adapted. But overall, I gave this 4 stars. Next up, I read The Beautiful Ones by Sylvia Moreno Garcia, and I don't even know where to start with this one. I loved it so much, and I don't know if I'll be able to talk coherently about it, because it was just like so overwhelmingly beautiful to me. And again, it dealt with some of like my favorite elements of both historical fiction and romance. Gosh, yeah, I don't even know where to start. So I guess to preface, I gave this 5 stars. And this book has solidified Sylvia Moreno Garcia as an auto-buy author for me. I thought the writing, like the prose, was so beautiful and vivid and just so romantic. Oh my gosh. Just right off the bat, that was one of my favorite things about this book. But The Beautiful Ones follows sort of a Regency-inspired timeline. It takes place in like a fictional country called Losail, and it's got a magical realism element to it. There's very casual use of like telekinesis, like some people have these like abilities, and there's other ones that are sort of briefly mentioned, but that's the one that's really important to this novel. And it follows a young woman named Nina who is debuting in society. She's hoping to, secure a marriage, but she has telekinetic abilities, and she's kind of doesn't have total control over it. It's very reflective of her emotions, but she ends up meeting this performer named Hector, who is like, his whole act is based off of his telekinetic abilities and his mastery over it. And she really admires Hector and sort of starts them off on this courtship. But Hector's got kind of a secret that really affects Nina. And it was just so full of drama and angst, and I loved every second of it. Again, I loved the sort of historical romance with like just a pinch of magical realism. Them coming together over their shared ability was just really beautiful, and he becomes like a mentor towards her as well as a love interest, and I thought that was really cute. There is a villain in this, like I don't know, not a villain, but like an antagonist who is so absolutely vile. It stirred such strong emotions in me. I was getting furious reading this book, but like in the best way, because it led to some very delicious drama. If you liked Sylvia Moreno Garcia's writing in Mexican Gothic, I know that was a super popular book last year, do not sleep on this book. It is so good, and this is a reprint of a previously released book of hers, so it's been out for a while, and I feel like it has not been getting the attention it deserves, because it is a beautiful, beautiful book. I have seen some people complain that it's like a little soap opera-y, but like, I don't know, I loved that. What's a book, what's wrong with a little drama in a book, So yeah, gave this 5 stars, absolutely loved it. Probably my favorite read of the month. Next up, I picked up It Happened One Summer by Tessa Bailey, which is a new release this month, and I have not super judged with Tessa Bailey's writing in the past. I read Tools of Engagement, which was a much hyped book, and did not care for it whatsoever. But I was so intrigued by the premise of this one, I really wanted to give her a second chance. This one follows a sort of Hollywood socialite named Piper, and she basically gets banished to the Pacific Northwest for her bad behavior. And she is pretty much tasked with fixing up her dead father's old sort of ramshackle bar. She's like very out of place, again, as a Hollywood sort of socialite in this very small fishing town. And she sort of bumps heads with this local fisherman named Brendan, and I wouldn't say it's enemies to lovers. They do get off on like the wrong foot at first, but I think they actually develop quite a cute friendship before they become lovers. And I really, really liked the first half of this book. I thought was so good, the lead up to their romance. I liked Piper's development. She's very much like Alexis from Schitt's Creek. I believe that was like the main inspiration for this book. And that comes off very strongly. So if you like Alexis, I would recommend this. I do think, again, she developed very quickly from being this spoiled brat to like someone who wants to put down roots in this tiny little fishing town. But it was cute, and you know, there's only so much you can do in a 400-page and 300-page novel. But as was my problem with Tools of Engagement, I do not care for the way that Tessa Bailey writes her male love interests. They come off as very alpha male, like super possessive, and the intimate scenes in this book are just kind of like a lot. And I mean, if you've been watching my videos for any amount of time, I read quite a bit of romance. Like, that doesn't usually bother me, but like just the way Tessa Bailey writes it is just not my favorite. But if you like raunchier books, I would recommend this one. It was a little much for me. So I gave this one 3 stars because, again, I really liked the first half. That was a definitely strong, like, 4-star for me, but the last half just sort of let me down a little bit. I am curious to pick up the next one, though. It's going to be focusing on Piper's sister, Hannah, and that seems cute. So I haven't given up on Tessa Bailey. I've just sort of resolved myself to, like, the fact that she's not my favorite romance author. Next up, I picked up the next book in the Wayward Children series, In an Absent Dream by Shawnee McGuire. I love this series of novellas. They're so good and captivating, and Shawnee McGuire's writing is so like haunting and beautiful. I can't even describe it beyond that. It's just very lyrical, and it really adds to the atmosphere of the world she's creating in these books. So this one serves as a bit of a prequel to the first one, Every Heart a Doorway. It follows the character Lundy, and it can be read before Every Heart a Doorway, one of the ones that I think would be fine if you picked up first. But I don't know. I don't know if it has more emotional impact reading it first or second. Learning Lundy's backstory was, like, I did not think I was going to care much about her. We didn't really know her very well in the first book. She was an intriguing character, but, like, I don't know. I personally didn't think much about her beyond the purpose she served in the first book. But learning how she got to be at the School for Wayward Children was just so beautiful and tragic. So in this one, she goes to the Goblin Market world, which has all of its own rules. It's very strict, very logical. Basically everything that is done, like, as either an act of service or sort of transactions has to be given fair value. So, and it's taken to, like, the extreme. In the Goblin Market, they don't have, like, one set currency. It's, like, traded in favors, and if you collect debt, something bad happens to you. And again, I'm just amazed at how much story Shawnee McGuire is able to pack into, like, less than 300 pages, less than 200. Oh no, it's 204. It's amazing. And again, just so haunting. I loved this one. Not my favorite in the series, but I do think it was a beautiful addition, and I gave it 4 stars. Next up, I read Christina Lauren's The Soulmate Equation, which is their newest book, and it came out in hardcover, apparently. Romance books rarely do, so that was weird when I found this in the store. But anyways, this book sort of ponders the question of what if you could find your soulmate based off of your DNA, and I thought that was a really fun premise. The main character, Jessica, is a single mom, which you don't see a lot in romance books, and I actually thought it was really done, or it was done very well in this one, and I liked how her being a single mom played into her trust and ability to fall in love with someone in this book. I thought that was really good, like, well handled. But Jess, on sort of a whim, ends up sort of taking this kit that analyzes her DNA and loads it into a dating app and pairs her, you know, with, based off your DNA, who would be your most ideal partner. And she gets an unheard of 98% match with one of the founders of the company. And she's previously actually met this man, and they did not get along. So she, like, does not believe the test. She's like, no, there's no way. This is not happening. But the company is really intrigued by these results, and they think it'd be really good PR for them before they publicly launch, and they want them to explore their relationship. So Jess decides to give it a chance, and again, it's a romance novel, so they fall in love. But it was cute. It's not my favorite Christina Lauren novel. I never really fell in love with the love interest, River. He was fine, but every romance book has sort of like a third act drama. I've talked about my issues with that in the past, and some books handle it really well, some books don't. I saw the third act conflict coming very early on, and not that that was a problem, but I hated the way that they handled it. Specifically, River. I was angered by it. I don't know. So that was not my favorite, and it was sort of a rare occurrence of a romance novel in which, like, I didn't care at that point if they got back together or not. So whatever. I believe I gave this one 3 stars. It wasn't the worst romance novel I've ever read. Most of it was quite cute, but I never was really rooting for the main couple, so that's sort of the point of a romance novel, and it fell a little flat for me, so I gave this one 3 stars. I also picked up and listened to John Green's The Anthropocene Reviewed. It's a collection of sort of memoir-ish essays in which he rates sort of silly things and sometimes serious things on a 5-star scale. A lot of these essays are taken from podcast episodes that he's done. I believe the podcast is also called The Anthropocene Reviewed, but some of them were written also during COVID, and it's very reflective of that. And that might not be for everybody, but I thought it was done really well. It didn't like make me feel anxious or panicked or anything. It was just sort of like him reflecting on the human condition in a pandemic situation. And he sort of pokes fun at himself for, there are several videos and like sound bites of him basically warning that a worldwide pandemic was gonna occur like in our lifetimes, so like prepare yourself. And he was like, I was not prepared. Which I thought was really funny. But yeah, overall, I thought this book was so charming. I love the concept of rating things like sunsets and the internet and like sycamore trees on a 5-star scale, and sort of their personal meaning to him was really cute. And I don't know, he brings up quite often in this book, especially in this day and age, it's so easy to be like really cynical and bitter, but if you choose to set that aside, there are some things that are really worth celebrating in the world, and I just thought that was a really beautiful sentiment and sort of made me appreciate humanity a little bit more. And again, it's so easy not to. I very often find myself going like, oh, I hate people, and like this book really makes me kind of reconsider, like, do I hate people or do I just hate the situation? What can be done to change things? And I appreciate any book that can make me feel that reflective. So I gave this one, I believe, 4 stars, mostly just because I thought the writing was lovely. I thought the audiobook was lovely, but Mr. John Green has a love for sports that I do not share. And quite a few of his stories kind of focus on that. And so like those weren't particularly my jam, but I appreciate his enthusiasm for it. Simultaneously, which is funny, I was reading his brother Hank's book, Beautifully Foolish Endeavor, which is the sequel and final book in the duology of An Absolutely Remarkable Thing. That's a mouthful. I can't talk too much about this one without spoiling the first one, but overall, this series focuses on sort of a first contact situation following a young woman named April May and an alien life form that she dubs Carl. And it really explores how Carl's presence changes humanity and sort of the extremes people go to or would probably go to in a first contact alien situation, and how that would really affect the world at large. So I thought this was super interesting. This second book really expanded the scope of the novel. I feel like the first book had like a really specific point, and this one really broadened it. And again, I can't get too into it without spoilers, but this one does also follow several more characters. An Absolutely Remarkable Thing, it's just April's point of view, but in this one, it's sort of like her whole friend gang, sort of tossing it back and forth to each other, which wasn't my favorite. I do feel like some of the voices weren't different enough, especially it was hard to follow if 2 characters were in the same place. I had a hard time remembering whose point of view it was technically supposed to be. So that was my only complaint about this one, is some of the voices just sounded too similar to really differentiate beyond like where they physically were. So I think I preferred the first one, but I believe I still gave this one 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. I thought the duology as a whole was really interesting and really insightful and made me think, which, you know, is a good sign for a sci-fi book, I think. And I really quite enjoyed this. So definitely recommend this duology if you like sci-fi or Hank Green. It has a very like millennial vibe to it. I will say that. So I don't think it's like for everyone necessarily, but it was a fun time and I enjoyed it. Why did I read so much this month? I also read Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. This copy specifically I picked up in a little library, so it's a little worse for wear, and it is the movie cover, which is not my favorite, but the content inside is still the same, so still wondering, or still worth the read. This book is hard to describe. I knew almost nothing about it going into it, other than that it takes place at a boarding school and kind of focuses on how the friendship between 3 people sort of develop over time. But beyond that, I knew nothing. And that is essentially what it is about. But it also gets a lot weirder than that. And I don't want to say anything as, you know, because I don't want to rob anybody else of the experience that I had sort of discovering what the hell was going on with this book. But I will say it wasn't my favorite. I had very high expectations. I believe this was like a Booker Prize finalist, or yeah, and it won like Book of the Year for a couple other awards and stuff. So this was like a much hyped book by a much hyped author, Kazuo Ishiguro. So I had high expectations and perhaps they were too high. I did not care for the writing style of this. It was very reflective. We follow mostly this girl named Kathy. She's the narrator and she's reflecting on her time in school with her friends Ruth and Tommy and how they all grew up together and stuff. But like, she would tell you like a thing happened, like, oh, Ruth and I got into an argument and this is how it happened. And like, so you already know that like the sort of final result of what is going to happen is an argument. And so that takes some of the dramatic tension out of things in certain parts, which is not my favorite way of revealing details or storytelling. Perhaps it's like, I'm just not analyzing it or reading into it well enough and I'm just taking it at face value. But like, I hated Ruth. I thought she was such a toxic friend to Kathy. Their circumstances definitely played into why Ruth was so horrible to me. And so I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt, but I didn't understand why Kathy was friends with her for so long. It kind of drove me nuts. But yeah, overall, this book was just kind of like okay for me. It definitely took weird turns. It did not, I don't know what I expected this book to be, but it was not that. And if you know, you know. But I ended up giving this 3 stars. Just, the story was okay, but I really did not care for the writing style or the characters very much. So, I don't even know if I want to check out the movie. And usually if I read a book that has a movie adaptation, I'm very eager to jump on it and kind of compare the two. But I'm very lukewarm after the end of this and, Gonna return it to the little library though, because I have no intentions of ever rereading it. So finally, I read 2 romance books on my Kindle this month, and they are both part of the Rules of Scoundrel series by Sarah McLean. The first one being A Rogue by Any Other Name, and the second one is One Good Earl Deserves a Lover. These are a little out of my comfort zone, out of my wheelhouse. Whenever I read romance books, it's usually like the romantic comedies with like the cute vector art covers. These ones were very much like the sort of cheesy romantic or historical romance covers. And I'll pop them here so you can see them. But they were fun. They're both based off of, like very loosely based off of classical like Greek myths. The first one is sort of a Persephone Hades retelling. And the second one is like an Orpheus, and I never know how to pronounce his lover's name, Eurydice retelling. They were cute. I really liked the premise, especially of the first one. It follows a young woman named Penelope, and she's approaching sort of spinsterhood. She's 28 years old and she hasn't been married yet. She was engaged to this duke when she was 19 years old, but that engagement fell through and that was kind of scandalous. So that sort of, it didn't quite ruin her. She did receive other marriage proposals later on, but she was really holding out for somebody that she felt she could care for. in sort of a stronger way. This is all too much to the frustration of her parents, who just want to marry her off and want to marry her sisters off. And when she's 20 years old, her father attaches this property to her dowry that previously belonged to a childhood friend of hers named Michael Bourne. And he lost this property in a terrible bet, and he's been sort of rebuilding his fortune and vowing revenge ever since. So when he finds out that his old property is attached to his childhood friend's dowry, he's like gonna marry her. And I thought this premise was kind of fun at first, but like the way they kind of got together, I thought could have been handled a lot better. I get that it's supposed to sort of mimic the rape of Persephone story. So I don't know, read into that what you will. But their relationship like did develop very slowly after that. And like, I don't know, I just thought it was frustrating because like if these two people had just talked to each other, all of their issues would have been poof, you know, they would have been resolved. So that frustrated me a bit. So I really liked the premise, but I feel like if it was more like, if I had written it, I would have done it very differently. But alas, I'm not a writer, so oh well. So I gave this one 3 stars. It wasn't bad. It was fun. Kind of my first dipping my toes into the more like heavily historical romance genre, and I enjoyed it. So the first book really leads into the second book. Like the last chapter sort of pivots its focus onto Penelope's sister, Philippa. And Philippa sort of approaches one of Bourne's business partners, who goes by the name of Cross, with the request that he ruin her. And so at the end of the first book, you're like, wait, what? Because like that's kind of extreme. Especially for a lady who's trying to get married. So in the next book, One Good Earl Deserves a Lover, it really explores Philippa and sort of her lifelong battle of feeling like very odd. She's very scientifically minded, and she is like a horticulturalist and an anatomist, and that's not anything that young ladies are supposed to be worried about or interested in. So she's put off a lot of potential suitors this way. And she just feels at odds with young women and society in general. And she sort of recognizes a peer in Cross in that he is also really interested in these things. And so she proposes that he basically teach her about the intimate side of marriage, because she feels like very unprepared for that. She is technically engaged to a lord, but he's kind of an idiot, and everyone all kind of agrees that she would not be happy in this marriage. She's doing it anyways for some reason, but she wants to be prepared for her wedding night, and she thinks Cross is the man to teach her how to do it. So that one was fun. I liked that one a smidge better than the first one. I liked the character of Cross a lot better than I liked Bourne as a love interest. But yeah, overall the series it's fun, but it's a very quick kind of fluffy read for me. I don't know if I'm going to continue with the series because it focuses on these 4 men who all run like a underground gambling hall, and I'm not quite sure if I'm interested in the other 2 guys as love interests. They didn't really do much for me in the first 2 books, so we'll see if I pick up the next 2. But yeah, it was a fun fluffy read. I gave them both 3 stars. They were fun. If you like that kind of thing, I recommend checking them out, especially where they had that sort of Greek myth retelling element. If you enjoy that, this is obviously very removed from the myth, but you can definitely see the points of inspiration, and I thought that was fun. This might be my longest wrap up yet. Holy crap. So if you're still watching, thank you for sticking with me till the end. That was definitely a lot, and I had a really good reading month. I don't think I hated any one thing that I read. Maybe Never Let Me Go was like my least favorite read, but it wasn't like horrible. So I'm pretty happy with 1, the amount that I was able to read, and 2, the quality of what I was reading. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Have you read any of these books? Let me know down in the comments below what you thought. I'd love to discuss them. And feel free to follow my socials down in the description box below. Like this video, subscribe to my channel, and have a wonderful day. Thank you so much. Bye.